Good evening, everyone. Panelists, you can now switch on your cameras. Big welcome to you. Big welcome to our panelists. Thanks to everyone for being here and to all of you for tuning in from home. We have a very important event ahead, and it's an honor to be hosting this critical discussion with our esteemed guests, Tamara Lorincz, Djibo Sobukwe, Janine Solanki, and Danny Haiphong. My name is Bianca Majeni, and I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, who are the organizers of today's event. And we also want to offer a big thanks to our co-sponsoring organization, Science for Peace. Please do find out more about the terrific work that Science for Peace does. Tamara will be posting a link to their website for you to find out about their great work. So today I'm speaking to you from Montreal, Quebec, or Tiohtià:ke, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. And it's a place that's long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. And it's excellent to see this turnout. There's already about 100 of us on the call. And I just want to let people know that we are live streaming to Facebook as well. So if you have any friends that still want to join, you can let them know that they can catch this discussion live on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Canada Policy. And again, I'll be posting that in the chat as well. So before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. We'd love to hear from you as always, and the chat is open. So please do say hello, let us know where you're from, the traditional territories that you're on. And as always, please do keep your comments civil, cordial, and free from racist, sexist, or otherwise harmful commentary. So say hi. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Hi, Gerard. Hi, Ajamu, Jason, Corey, William. It's great to see you all. So after our speakers give their introductory remarks, we're going to be opening up to questions from the audience. So please be thinking about what you'd like to ask. And please do post it in the Q&A box, which is kind of at the bottom of your screen. It's much easier for us to find your questions there than in the chat. So please do post them there. And we'll get to as many as we can, time permitting. So again, my name is Bianca Majeni, and I'm here representing the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which is an organization that challenges unjust foreign policy measures and aims to bridge the gap between the perception and reality of Canada's role in the world. And we also seek to challenge and oppose the racism that is embedded in Canadian foreign policy. So you can find out more about us at foreignpolicy.ca. And I also want to remind the audience that our organization is entirely funded through donations from our community. So please do consider donating or becoming a sustainer at foreignpolicy.ca/donation. So today's event, today is the final day of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Summit in Madrid. We're seeing headlines about the alliance's decision to openly target China and massively expand its high readiness force. Canada and other NATO nations are adding more forces all along Eastern Europe. And we know that Canada is bound to NATO. According to military historian Jack Granatstein, open quote, NATO is the alliance to which Canada had devoted perhaps 90% of its military effort since 1949, close quote. And in 1969, Pierre Trudeau stated, NATO in reality had determined all of our defense policy. We had no defense policy, so to speak, except that of NATO, and our defense policy had determined all of our foreign policy. And we had no foreign policy of any importance except that which flowed from NATO, close quote. So as a Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, understanding NATO is key. The following is a bit of important, if lesser known historical context to help situate the discussion that we're about to have tonight. A year before its inception in 1949, the US, UK, and Canada held initial private meetings to found the alliance. Two of the main reasons for establishing NATO, weakening left forces in post-war Europe and strengthening the US empire. During the Second World War, many among the rich, the powerful, as well as the church supported the fascists and were now discredited. So communist parties were now very popular in Greece and Italy and France in the late 1940s. So to blunt the possible rise of domestic communist parties, tens of thousands of Canadian and American troops were stationed in Western Europe as part of NATO. In March 1949, then Canadian External Minister Lester Pearson was open about this element of NATO and said the following in the House of Commons: "The power of the communists, wherever that power flourishes, depends upon their ability to suppress and destroy the free institutions that stand against them. They pick them off one by one, the political parties, the trade unions, the churches, the schools, the universities, the trade associations, even the sporting clubs and the kindergartens. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is meant to be a declaration to the world that this kind of conquest from within will not in the future take place amongst us," close quote. The second main motivation for NATO was to reinforce the European colonial system and bring it under US orbit. To maintain their colonies, European powers increasingly depended on North American diplomatic and financial assistance. Between 1950 and 1958, Canada donated a whopping $8 billion in today's terms in ammunition, fighter jets, military training, and more to European countries through NATO's program, the Mutual Aid Program. And this is during a time when European powers were actively suppressing independence movements in places like Algeria, Kenya, Vietnam, and Congo. Lester Pearson also stated, open quote, "There is no better way of ensuring the security of the Pacific Ocean at this particular moment than by working out between the great democratic powers a security agreement, the effects of which will be felt all over the world, including the Pacific area," close quote. So this is important history to consider as we try to make sense of Canada's involvement with the alliance. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist of the evening, Janine Solanki. Janine is an executive member of Mobilization Against War and Occupation, or MAWO, and an editorial board member of Fire This Time newspaper. She frequently writes on social justice causes, including Cuba solidarity and anti-war issues. Janine is based in Vancouver, BC. Welcome, Janine.
Hello, thanks, Bianca, and a big thanks to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Science for Peace for bringing us all together to discuss, as what Bianca said, is a really critical issue for the anti-war movement and all peace-loving people around the world today. As Bianca said, I am based in Vancouver, BC, which is on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So I'd like to start just talking a little bit about the last maybe 30 years of NATO and what are we really dealing with here? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is really sold to the public as a defense organization made up of Western democracies, ensuring safety and security around the world. And until recently, I think some people viewed NATO as just a Cold War relic and didn't give it a second thought. However, NATO is neither of these things. NATO is a military alliance, moving pieces around an imperialist battlefield that is our entire world. With NATO, imperialist countries with the United States at the helm are conducting a division of labor for the new era of war and occupation that started with the 2001 invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and continues today. And I think it's important to also discuss why, and I think from our analysis is in the response to the deepening financial capitalist financial and market crisis, the US government and their imperialist allies see no solution other than to gain control of new resources and people to exploit around the world. This kind of global hegemony is too big a task for the United States alone, and this immense and far-reaching imperialist military machine needs an infrastructure to work. The overt and covert wars, the coups, the occupations, and military operations are not possible without NATO, and with it, a global network of foreign military bases. According to the United States Department of Defense website, the US military operates in more than 160 countries on all 7 continents except for, on all 7 continents, and with approximately 4,800 defense sites and at least 1,000 US foreign military bases. This is all a vital part of NATO's infrastructure, with NATO and the US military bases combined to form a strategic network of deadly military might that wages wars, occupations, provocations all across the globe. As you can see quickly by looking at the NATO and US bases where they're most active, they're encircling and provoking both Russia and China, who are part of this new Cold War II key competitors in the US military and imperialist expansion. NATO also demands that its members increase military spending to meet 2% GDP targets, money that could be spent, especially as we've seen in the last couple of years, during a time of pandemic, on healthcare, on housing, on education, any number of things that people need much more than bullets and bombs. At $1.1 trillion, NATO accounts for 60% of global military spending. Since 2014, the Canadian military has been spending has increased by 70%. And last year, Canada spent $33 billion on the military, which is 15 times more than on the environment and climate change. Recently, Canada's Defense Minister, Anand, announced that it will increase by another 70% over the next 5 years. And while NATO formed in 1949, and Bianca gave an overview of their early years, NATO in the last 30 years has become a dangerous military force and behind many of the bloody imperialist atrocities committed under the auspices of the international community. From the Middle East to Africa, Asia to Latin America, and as we're seeing now in Europe, we're living in a new era of war and occupation. This new era began with the US NATO invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, which continued with 20 years of brutal occupation and NATO's longest military mission. At the height, NATO had 130,000 troops in Afghanistan, which was a division of labor that allowed the United States to then focus on their war in Iraq. NATO was also engaged in the war in Iraq on training missions under the banner of NATO, which Canada was part of, with at least 200 that we know of, special forces in Iraq for so-called train, advise, and assist missions, which were sold to the public as non-combat missions, and were proven time and time again to involve more of the assist in combat zones and just a continuation of war and occupation. We can also look to the devastating NATO bombing of Libya in 2011, which left the country, which was formerly had the highest living standard in Africa, in a complete chaos, which I believe one of my co-speakers, Djibo, will be speaking about more. And it's important also not to forget NATO's debut as a military force, starting in the 1990s, when NATO intervened in Yugoslavia with numerous military missions, culminating in a 78-day bombing campaign in 1999. That brutal and indiscriminate bombing by NATO members devastated Yugoslavia with 14,000 bombs, including depleted uranium bombs and cluster munitions, which have long-lasting destructive impacts. This was a so-called, of course, humanitarian intervention, but that resulted in over 2,000 civilians killed, thousands more injured, and over 200,000 people displaced and forced to leave their homes. Canada also had a role and deployed their 18 CF-18 fighter jets, responsible for 10% of all the bombs dropped on Yugoslavia. So while recently what we're hearing in mainstream media is the crying of crocodile tears over Ukraine and the claiming that this was, and the very racist claims about not being used to war in Europe, that this was the first time since World War II that war had struck so-called civilized Europe, they were very quick to forget the people of Yugoslavia, and that this brutal war was carried out by the very same NATO that has provoked the war with Russia and Ukraine and is drawing this war out instead of negotiating its end. So before further talking about Ukraine today, which is of course on all of our minds and which is something very important for us to discuss and understand, it's important to remember that this war did not start in February 2022. Between 1990 and 1991, the US made repeated assurances to the former Soviet Union that NATO would not expand eastward. However, NATO has been aggressively expanding even beyond the North Atlantic and now has 30 member states and formal agreements with another 42 countries through various agreements and partnerships. In 2008, NATO announced plans to extend membership to Ukraine and Georgia, in addition to the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, which joined NATO in 2004. NATO opposed this continued expansion, Russia opposed this continued expansion of NATO with their very legitimate security concerns as it further encircles Russia by NATO's imperialist forces. In 2014, the US staged a right-wing coup in Ukraine, placing Ukraine's puppet government firmly in the pocket of the US government, and also covertly funding and supporting ultranationalist and neo-Nazi forces. Since then, a rarely reported war has been raging in Ukraine's ethnically Russian Donbass region in eastern Ukraine, with right-wing militias and Ukrainian military attacking the region, leading to the deaths of over 14,000 people. NATO's saber rattling continued, further expanding NATO forces right up to the border with Russia. Following the 2016 NATO summit, NATO started rotating 4 combat battalions of up to 1,000 troops each from Canada, Germany, and the United Kingdom and United States in Poland and the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. At that time, NATO also announced the US-built European missile shield defense system, not really a defense, but a very provocative move that had Russia in its targets. So this extensive timeline that I've tried to condense and sum up brings us to the current war in Ukraine. Instead of minimizing casualties and negotiating with Russia regarding their legitimate security concerns, NATO and their member countries, including Canada, have dragged this war out, have supplied Ukraine with weapons, have demonized Russia, and conveniently glossed over the decades of provocations leading to this war, capitalizing on the fear-mongering and turning victims into propaganda pieces to further expand NATO, as we've seen from this last weekend in the NATO summit. So in last weekend's NATO summit in Madrid, Spain, NATO doubled down on their dangerous expansion. NATO announced that they will increase their rapid reaction force nearly 8-fold from 40,000 to 300,000 troops. Part of this will include the 3,400 Canadian troops previously promised in March, including Canada's Army, Air, and Naval forces. Another announcement from the NATO summit was the invitation to NATO of 2 previously neutral countries, Finland, which shares a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, and Sweden. The danger that NATO threatens for oppressed people around the world is becoming more and more apparent, and opposition to NATO is growing, as we are all here today to discuss. Despite them using the war in Ukraine to try and sell their farce of being a force of security, this kind of military buildup has nothing to do with defense. You don't build up a military force like this just to sit there in case. It's built to attack, it's built for offense. And the people of former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and many other people know that far too well. So on June 29th and 30th, on June 29th and 30th, NATO held a summit in Madrid, Spain, at this very critical time when NATO's war machine is reaching unprecedented new levels. This was met with events and demonstrations, and a huge demonstration with thousands of people protesting in Madrid and across Europe and other parts of the world too. Here in Canada, the Canada Peace and Justice Network called for days of action from June 24th to 30th, And I also want to just say, as a side note, the Canada Peace and Justice Network is a network that came together in 2020 and includes both individual members, organizational members, including the organization I'm here representing, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO, and many others from across Canada. We're united and committed to working together on anti-war, peace, and environmental, international solidarity, decolonization, and other social justice causes. And we encourage people who are not involved to join us and to build the anti-war movement across Canada with us. For this Canada-wide Days of Action, groups united on the demands of stop the weapons, stop the war, stop NATO, held protests at federal and legislative buildings, MP offices, city halls, CBC News offices, busy downtown centers, and importantly at the offices of Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Defense Anita Anand, and the Prime Minister's office and the US Embassy. We were protesting up until today in cities like Victoria, Vancouver, Nanaimo, Regina, Winnipeg, Collingwood, Hamilton, Montreal, Calgary, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Waterloo, Oakville, and Ottawa, cities small and large. And from these important actions, a new campaign to demand Canada out of NATO is launching, which I believe Tamara will be speaking about. Peace-loving people around the world must build a stronger and more united global movement against NATO. Imperialist countries are united in NATO and know no borders. For us in the anti-war and peace movement, we must work together. We must build a united anti-war movement across borders to dismantle NATO, close all US NATO military bases around the world, and stop the deadly imperialist war machine in its tracks. Here in Canada, this starts with the campaign for Canada out of NATO. So that's all I wanted to share with you for today. I'm very happy and honored to be speaking alongside a wonderful panel of speakers, and I look forward to going on to hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janine. Thank you for the rousing call to action as well, and for all those details about NATO military missions and the devastation wrought, the very important information, as well as the importance of trying to negotiate diplomacy within the context of this war, and yeah, just for providing those critical little known details, leading up to Russia's terrible illegal war in Ukraine that served to escalate the war. So I just want to thank you for your important work resisting colonialism against NATO, and also for reporting back on all those actions. It's really heartening to hear about all this resistance. I also want to remind people that if you have questions for our speakers, please do post them in the chat. Janine, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. So our next speaker of the evening is Danny Haiphong. Danny is a contributor to the Black Agenda Report and co-editor of Friends of Socialist China. He's the host of the YouTube show, The Left Lens. His work can be followed on Twitter at Spirit of Ho and Telegram at the Haiphong Press. You can support Danny's Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong, which is one word, and on Substack at the Chronicles of Haiphong. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for the introduction, and thanks to all the panelists and to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute for having me. Today, I'm going to talk about China, and of course, China has come under the gun of NATO in this latest NATO summit. And I want to talk about the United States' role. That's where I'm based. Of course, this has a lot of relevance to Canada, given that they're both members of NATO, and that the United States' foreign policy interests are really all what NATO is about. And so first, I think we need to talk about how this year's NATO summit, of course, is taking place amid this geopolitical seismic wave that's crashing upon Eurasia right now, which is Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. And contrary to the musings of the US foreign policy establishment and its loyal servants in the West, Canada not excluded, NATO is no defensive institution, but rather the root cause of this dangerous confrontation that has
Danny, can I
developed.
ask you to speak just a little bit louder or turn up your microphone?
Okay, yeah, sure. So as I said before, uh, this year's NATO summit took place and is taking place amid this geopolitical seismic wave that's crashing upon Eurasia right now, which is Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. Contrary to the musings of the US foreign policy establishment and its loyal servants in the West, NATO is not a defensive institution, but rather the root cause of this dangerous confrontation developing between the United States and Russia. NATO provoked Russia to intervene in Ukraine by sponsoring a right-wing coup in 2014 and then facilitating a regime of ethnic cleansing in the Donbass region for the next 8 years, all the way up until today. NATO is now prolonging the special military operation in Ukraine through massive military aid packages and economic sanctions. True to imperialism, NATO has no intention of stopping with Ukraine, and that's why China has become a focus. Not only does the military alliance have plans to expand further into Eurasia to provoke Russia, but it has set its sights on China and the Asia Pacific region. NATO's ambitions are nothing more than an extension of US foreign policy objectives. The primary objective of US imperialism at this moment in history is the containment of China, which is really just a euphemism for war. While US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has denied any intention of creating a quote unquote Asian NATO, US and NATO actions really do say otherwise. NATO invited Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea to this year's summit. NATO has also announced in its NATO 2030 quote unquote initiative that the strategic concept which has been deliberated at this summit will have a heavy focus on the so-called threats posed by China. I think the document called China malicious. Beyond the summit, the United States has led the way in developing military and political alliances that mirror NATO. In 2020, the Trump administration revived the quadrilateral security dialogue known as the Quad to bring India, Japan, and Australia further into the anti-China fold. However, members of the Quad are careful not to engage in a united military pact, so the Biden administration was compelled to launch AUKUS in 2021, a mini Asian NATO. AUKUS brings the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia into a military alliance which promises to equip Australia with nuclear-powered submarines and encourage Australia to increase its military spending to satisfy these imperialist partners, all in the name of countering the so-called China threat. On June 24th, the US announced the formation of the Partners in Blue in the Blue Pacific initiative with New Zealand, Australia, and the UK in an obvious response to China's recent security agreement with the Solomon Islands. The US's emphasis on building up military alliances in the Asia Pacific against China can be traced back to former President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia strategy. The pivot to Asia has since morphed into an Indo-Pacific strategy that has garnered lukewarm results. China's stabilizing economic presence in the region presents a counterweight to the US's military ambitions. Even the most unfriendly nations in the region toward China, such as Japan, for example, must carefully negotiate between its loyalties to the United States and its need for trade relations with China. For all the talk of an Asian NATO or a stronger US-led military alliance in the region, the US has been forced up until this point to rely on bilateral relationships to forward its aggressive policy toward China. But still, NATO's decision to shift attention on the Pacific and on China is a clear and present threat to world peace. Even the Washington Post-owned Foreign Policy magazine has warned of a global Cold War arising out of NATO's interest in China. The US government and Northrop Grumman-funded Center for Strategic and International Studies has admitted that NATO is returning to a Cold War posture by targeting Russia and China simultaneously. A better term for this strategy, in my opinion, is full spectrum dominance. The alliances that the US is attempting to build in the Pacific are nothing more than an extension of a decade-long militaristic posture toward China, which has brought more than half of the US's military arsenal to the Asia-Pacific region. Now, this brings the question of Taiwan into view, and I think it was important to mention and to talk about Taiwan today, because it's clear to anyone that's paying attention that the US views Taiwan as the single most important flashpoint for its military strategy against China. US President Joe Biden has already approved of 4 different weapons transfers to Taiwan over the course of his 18 months as president. Biden has also verbalized on 3 different occasions that his administration is committed to defending the island from a so-called invasion from China. These moves are dangerous violations of what's called the status quo on the Taiwan question, established during the tumultuous latter stages of the Cold War. The recognition of the People's Republic of China by the United Nations in 1971 and the normalization of relations between the United States and China in 1979 affirmed Taiwan as a Chinese province under the One China principle. However, the United States under successive administrations has moved away from the status quo by providing clear political support to separatist forces in legislation such as the Taipei Act, which advocates for Taiwan's active participation within prominent international bodies. Furthermore, the United States has increased arms sales to Taiwan in violation of Article 6 of the 1982 Joint Communique between China and the United States, which states the following, quote, "Having in mind the foregoing statements of both sides, the United States government states that it does not seek to carry out a long-term policy of arms sales to Taiwan, that its arms sales to Taiwan will not exceed, either in qualitative or in quantitative terms, the level of those supplied in recent years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and China, and that it intends to gradually reduce its sale of arms to Taiwan, leading over a period of time to a final resolution," end quote. To get a picture of just how much the United States has violated this specific clause, the US maintains a backlog of weapons transfers to Taiwan worth 14 billion US dollars. And this number is only set to grow with the announcement of 120 million more in assistance to Taiwan's so-called naval forces that happened earlier this month. Taiwan is intimately connected to the US's overall strategy of developing a NATO-like infrastructure in the Pacific. US military strategists and talking heads have become obsessed with likening Ukraine to Taiwan. Their argument is that Russia's special military operation in Ukraine means that the US must escalate in Taiwan to protect the island from China. The problem with this formulation is twofold. Ukraine is a sovereign country, and Taiwan is a province of China. Where the parallel truly resides is that, similar to Ukraine being used as a pawn to forward the NATO encirclement of Russia, Taiwan is being used as a chip in the US's plans to militarily encircle China. A key country to watch following this year's NATO summit is Japan. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe preempted the NATO summit by stating that China should be forced to, quote, "give up seizing Taiwan," end quote. Japan currently stations more than 120 US military bases and has already made a commitment to increase military spending in a show of loyalty to the US's anti-China geopolitical strategy. With South Korea's election of a new pro-US right-wing president and Australia's ridiculously counterproductive policy of hostility toward China, the US is likely going to seek firmer commitments from its so-called allies on the question of Taiwan. The US sees in the Taiwan question both a profitable venture for its defense industry and an opportunity to build the case for war with China. But the US's legitimacy is on the decline, and China's prestige in Asia, the Pacific, and the rest of the world is on the rise. The US doesn't merely seek alliances, it needs them. Military encirclement in the host of aggressive policies that the US has deployed against China cannot succeed in isolation if they can succeed at all. The US understands that any conflict with China over Taiwan would require a level of support in the region similar to the servitude demonstrated by Europe against Russia in this special military operation that's occurring right now. Such a pursuit is incredibly reckless for a number of reasons. First, China presents no tangible military threat and in fact makes peace a fundamental priority in the international arena. China has only a single military base abroad. It has not participated in a military conflict in more than 40 years. Furthermore, while China seeks peaceful resolution to the issue of reunification with Taiwan, it will not tolerate any attempt by the United States to engineer independence or separatism. So-called Taiwan independence is China's red line, just as Russia's red line was NATO expansion into Ukraine and beyond. The US's provocations in Taiwan thus risk a hot war with China that would inevitably lead to nuclear exchange. A hot war with China would destroy whatever stability exists around the world and create an economic and human catastrophe far greater than what has occurred over the course of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. Those who dismiss these real and legitimate threats to humanity in favor of xenophobia, yellow peril, and new Cold War talking points are walking in lockstep with the US empire. It is critical that we resist this reactionary defeatism, oppose any and all attempts of the US to form a NATO-like infrastructure in the Pacific, and align ourselves with all global forces, including China, standing on the side of self-determination and peace. Thank you again for having me today. I really appreciate being here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Danny. It's wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much for detailing the threat of NATO against China, the emergence of AUKUS, very important, elaborating on the Taiwan question, and for the clear warning about the emergence of a global Cold War and the possibility of a hot war with China and the threats to all life on Earth. So I look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. And again, to folks at home, please do post your questions in the Q&A chat for the speakers, and we'll get to as many as we can. So our next speaker of the evening is Djibo Sobukwe. Djibo is on the research and political education team of the Black Alliance for Peace. He's also a former Central Committee member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who worked with Kwame Ture on the Political Education Committee. Welcome, Djibo. I think you're still on mute.
Yes, okay, now I'm good. Thank you so much, Bianca, for that nice introduction. Greetings, everyone. And I want to thank the organizers for this timely webinar and for inviting me to make a contribution. I am here in the United States, Lenape territory. I like when the previous speakers respected the indigenous of Canada. It is timely not only because NATO is concluding its meeting in Madrid as we speak, but also AFRICOM, as one of the many arms of NATO, is conducting its yearly military exercises called African Lion on the African continent at this time. Many people have already talked about the background of NATO, so I won't go into that history. But since I wrote my article in the Black Agenda Report back in February entitled NATO and Africa, a relationship of colonial violence and structural white supremacy. Now, as was mentioned before, 2 more European countries have applied, and as I understand, they will be accepted into NATO. This will increase their membership from the founding 12 in 1949 to now 32 with those 2 new ones. Today, NATO has become a huge global axle in the wheel of the military-industrial complex, which includes more than 800 US military bases around the world, and bases or relationships with almost all African countries, all controlled by the US empire for the purpose of full spectrum dominance, driven by ferocious appetites of corporate capital. Now, full spectrum dominance means specifically US military control over land, sea, air, and space, which is now the so-called fourth dimension of warfare, to, quote, protect US interests and investment, unquote. Quote unquote, protect means guarantee operational freedom. Quote, US interests and investment, unquote, means corporate profits. The late Dr. Walter Rodney accurately described the early foundation of colonial Africa's relationship with NATO, which continues today in his classic book published in 1972 called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. He said, and I quote, needless to say, in the 1950s, when most Africans were still colonial subjects, they had absolutely no control over the utilization of their soil for militaristic ends. Virtually the whole of North Africa was turned into a sphere of operations for NATO, with bases aimed at the Soviet Union. There could have easily developed a nuclear war without African peoples having any knowledge of the matter. The colonial powers actually held military conferences in African cities like Dakar and Nairobi in the early 1950s, inviting the whites of South Africa and Rhodesia and the government of the USA. Time and time again, the evidence points to this cynical use of Africa to buttress capitalism economically and militarily, and therefore, in effect, forcing Africa to contribute to its own exploitation. Now, I want to highlight that last sentence that Walter Rodney wrote in 1972, the sentence where he says, quote, forcing Africa to contribute to its own militarization. Now, it has done this in several ways, but most importantly by ushering in neo-colonial governments after nominal independence that would do the bidding for the former colonizers. Many of these colonizing countries have been part of the NATO membership since its founding, and they already had some military installations in these countries. The recolonization by way of neocolonialism was largely successful in spite of the fierce resistance by anti-colonial liberation movements and leaders. This class struggle also manifests itself in the OAU, Organization of African Unity, founded in 1963, where there were two contending groups of countries. One group that wanted a continued dependent relationship with the colonizing countries on the one hand, and those that did not on the other. Imperialism has always used its strategy of divide and rule to enable the acceptance of the idea of a, quote, benevolent NATO. The colonial powers knew that they had to convince and recruit a neo-colonial class of indigenous Africans who would do their bidding. This divide played itself out in the national liberation movements between those who were friendly to imperialist forces and those who wanted a real break from colonialism. The late great Kwame Nkrumah explains in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, the wide array of methods employed by neocolonialism, ranging from economics, politics, religious, ideological, and cultural spheres. To do this, NATO works hand in hand with other mechanisms of imperialism, like the CIA, which was instrumental in the coup against the Nkrumah government and the murder of Patrice Lumumba. Countries that offered organized resistance to colonialism and neocolonialism included, for example, the Portuguese colonies. And Portugal was one of the 12 founding members of NATO. The great freedom fighter of Africa, Amilcar Cabral, called Portugal a, quote, rotten appendage of imperialism. He said Portugal is the most underdeveloped country in Western Europe. Portugal would never be able to launch 3 colonial wars in Africa without the help of NATO. The weapons of NATO, the planes of NATO, the bombs of NATO, it would simply be impossible for them, he said, unquote. Cabral goes on to explain that the only reason Portugal was able to hold on to its colonies in Africa is because it had been a semi-colony of Britain itself since 1775, and Britain defended Portugal's interests during the partition of Africa. Furthermore, NATO, a creation of the US, uses Portugal and its colonies as part of the larger objective of domination of Africa and the world. Portugal conducted a vicious war against its colonies in Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, Angola, and Mozambique, much like the US did in Vietnam. In both cases, the colonizing powers used the most modern weapons, including napalm and cluster bombing campaigns, killing thousands against guerrilla armies that refused to bow down. The Portuguese dictator Caetano was forced to give up economic interest in Angola to some of the NATO powers in exchange for the NATO armaments and supplies they used. Yet Portugal still lost the war against the heroic anti-colonial forces. The US NATO role in the destruction of Libya in 2011 is important to highlight because it offers some important lessons. First, US imperialism and its Western NATO lackeys do not accept any country that decides to be an independent force outside of its sphere of influence. Secondly, it also demonstrates how NATO can work hand in hand with other US Western-dominated world structures like the United Nations. In 2011, the UN Resolution 1973 gave political authorization for a no-fly zone and a blockade of Libya to purportedly, quote unquote, protect the citizens. You know, they always want to protect somebody, which ultimately resulted in the destruction of Africa's most prosperous country, a country with the highest human development index on the continent. The United States-led NATO forces launched a bombing campaign that killed tens of thousands of civilians and tens of billions of property and infrastructure damage. This shows how, although US-led NATO sometimes uses the United Nations for political cover, it has no problem illegally overstepping its UN mandate to commit its crimes against humanity and achieve its regime change goals. Indirect and direct cooperation between NATO, the UN, the AU, and the Arab League shows the expansive and deeply woven web of the US and NATO reach. In the book called The Illegal War on Libya, edited by Cynthia McKinney, it includes a chapter titled NATO's Libya War, a Nuremberg-level crime, in which Stephen Ledman writes, quote, "The US-led NATO war on Libya will be remembered as one of history's greatest crimes, violating the letter and the spirit of international law. In a just world, the US Obama administration's destruction of Libya in 2011 and the ongoing humanitarian crisis would be prosecuted as a war crime. The Democratic Republic of Congo has the highest death rate of all, with some 6 million people killed when Uganda and Rwanda, US proxies, invaded that country in 1996, all to ensure the uninterrupted plunder of Africa's strategic raw minerals, such as cobalt, tantalum, chromium, coltan, uranium, etc. These minerals are strategically important not only for cell phones, but also for the technologies that drive the military-industrial complex. Those mentioned here are but a small sampling of NATO's AFRICOM's bloody works in Africa's past and are ongoing. to understand some of the extensions of NATO, we have to understand the relationship between NATO and AFRICOM. AFRICOM is actually a direct product of NATO via EUCOM, which is the US European Command, because EUCOM is a central part of NATO, and EUCOM originally also took responsibility for 42 African states. In 2003, NATO started expanding. 4 years later, in 2007, the EUCOM commander, James L. Jones, who was also commander of operational forces of NATO, proposed the creation of AFRICOM. AFRICOM continues to operate under the guise of quote unquote training and quote humanitarian peacekeeping assistance. Jihadist terrorist violence on the African continent has increased since the founding of AFRICOM and NATO's destruction of Libya, resulting in civilian casualties and instability, which the West has used as a pretext and justification for the continued need for AFRICOM. As the Black Alliance for Peace's AFRICOM Watch Bulletin reported, since the founding of AFRICOM, there has also been an increase in coups by AFRICOM-trained soldiers. Consistent with what Nkrumah and Rodney and others have warned of in the 60s and the 70s, NATO continues today in the form of AFRICOM, facilitating wars, instability, and the corporate pillage of Africa. This hypocrisy also explains why 17 African nations abstained from the March 2nd, 2022 United Nations resolution condemning Russia, and one Eritrea voted no. Their experience with NATO and AFRICOM ensure skepticism of self-proclaimed noble motives. The US NATO death toll inflicted on the African continent makes any claim of concern for human rights hypocritical. The Black Alliance of Peace calls for the dismantling of NATO, AFRICOM, and all imperialist structures. Africa and the rest of the world cannot be free until all people have the right of sovereignty and the right to live free of domination. Every year in October, the Black Alliance of Peace organizes the International Month of Action Against AFRICOM, which aims to raise the public's awareness about the US military's existence in Africa and how the presence of US forces exacerbates violence and instability throughout the continent. The Black Alliance of Peace also stands against the growing influence and power of Southcom and the ever increasing militarization of the Americas. For more information, you can go to the Black Alliance for Peace website, which is blackallianceforpeace.com. No compromise, no retreat. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much, Djibo. It was wonderful, wonderful to hear from you. Wonderful to hear all those important details on NATO, US, Africa. It's really rousing presentation. I really appreciated the details on NATO's past and ongoing colonial aggression, including the US-NATO role in the destruction of Libya in 2011, and just the shocking use of African soil to contribute to its own exploitation and militarization, as you so eloquently stated. So I think it's also very important for viewers to understand the relationship of AFRICOM to NATO, and I'm definitely going to personally be checking out the AFRICOM Watch Bulletin myself. Thank you for drawing that to our attention. So please do see Djibo's very important article. It's called NATO and Africa, a relationship of colonial violence and structural white supremacy, which Tamara Lorincz posted in the chat at the blackagendareport.com. Thank you, Djibo. So the final speaker of the evening is Tamara Lorincz. Tamara is a PhD candidate at the Balsillie School for International Affairs. She's a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, or WILPF, and the No to NATO Network. Tamara is also a fellow of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and is also involved in the newly formed NATO to Neutrality Working Group of Science for Peace. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you. So I have a brief presentation, and then I'm going to quickly show you some slides. We are taking on NATO, a military alliance of 30 wealthy Western countries with the biggest armies and the biggest surveillance systems and a combined military budget of $1.1 trillion. And we are going to dismantle it. In fact, the dismantling of NATO has already begun. The dismantling is well underway, despite the fact that NATO is expanding and acquiring new members. The collapse of the alliance is coming from the cracks in the foundation that we are making by our grassroots resistance, from our protest rallies, marches, petitions, webinars, letters, articles, and our demos and our disruptions. We are challenging the false claims that NATO protects our democracy, our sovereignty, and our freedom, as well described by Janine, Danny, and Djibo. These cracks are going to get bigger and deeper, and we are going to topple NATO. 14 years ago, in 2008, 650 organizations from over 30 countries signed the Stuttgart Appeal against the Transatlantic Alliance, and they formed the No to War, No to NATO network. A few months later, in 2009, the network organized a massive protest outside the NATO summit in Strasbourg. Over the past decade, the network has been working hard and growing. This past weekend, the No to War, No to NATO network helped to organize the biggest rally against the alliance ever in Europe. On Sunday in Madrid, there were over 30,000 people on the streets with signs, Cumbre por la Paz, OTAN no, Summit for Peace, No to NATO. In the United Kingdom on Saturday, there were dozens and dozens of rallies across the country. Stop the war in Ukraine, stop NATO. And there was a big protest outside of Whitehall, the British Ministry of Defense in London. And this was organized by Stop the War Coalition. And in Sweden and in Finland, people were on the streets trying to stop their countries from joining the alliance and trying to preserve their neutrality. Around the world this past weekend, there was a 24-hour global peace wave. Yes to cooperation, no to militarization. And it was a direct challenge to NATO. Across Canada, as Janine described, there were 15 rallies from Victoria to Halifax. The Halifax action is happening this weekend. And we issued a joint statement and launched a petition. I will put a link in the chat for you to sign it. Please sign this petition. It's directed to our Prime Minister, our Minister of Defense, and our Foreign Affairs Minister. So we are building a Canada out of NATO coalition. 3 years ago, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace launched a campaign, Feminists Against Militarism, Women Say No to NATO. And we protested every month outside the NATO Association of Canada office in downtown Toronto, because we know that NATO is sabotaging the women, peace, and security agenda. Science for Peace is now going to establish a NATO to neutrality working group to create a space for academic and activist research to challenge the alliance. And I will put my email in the chat so you can get involved in these coalitions and campaigns. It is through our collective work that more and more people will see that NATO is an organization of Western domination and violence that is causing war and creating insecurity for people everywhere. More and more people will see that NATO, a nuclear-armed military alliance that is risking nuclear war, is the greatest obstacle for disarmament. More and more people will see that NATO is diverting public resources away from social welfare and environmental protection into bloated military budgets that only enrich generals and arms dealers. 3 months ago, Evo Morales, the former president of Bolivia, said, quote, NATO is a danger to world peace, to security. So we are in the task of reaching agreements with social movements, not only in Latin America, but in all continents to eliminate it. If nothing is done against NATO, it will become a permanent threat to humanity, unquote. So we are not alone. The people of Latin America, Europe, and around the world are resisting NATO, and we are part of this international movement. So with courage and solidarity, we must continue this resistance. We must continue to speak out and to stand up. We must challenge and delegitimize NATO wherever we go. It is with our people power and persistence that we will create the cracks in the foundation of NATO. And this is how we are going to bring down NATO, and we will bring it down. And finally, I want to emphasize that this dismantling is an urgent imperative. Canada and other NATO countries cannot reduce carbon emissions and meet their climate targets under the Paris Agreement by 2030 because of NATO's demand for increased military spending and for more fossil fuel-powered weapon systems like fighter jets, warships, and tanks, which are only causing the exacerbation of the climate catastrophe. I would like to let you know, if you haven't heard the announcement, that Canada is going to be hosting NATO's Center of Excellence for Climate and Security in Montreal. This is a greenwash and it must be opposed. If Trudeau were serious about the climate emergency, Canada would withdraw from NATO, demilitarize, and decarbonize. As well, the international community cannot achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 with NATO's militarism and military spending. And so it is for a livable planet and for the poor that we have to work together to dismantle NATO. And there are alternatives to the alliance. There is the United Nations system with all 193 countries. There is a regional organization called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe that includes all countries of Europe and Russia. There are alternatives. I also want to encourage you to check out a new report that was just issued by the International Peace Bureau called Common Security, Our Shared Future. Security is indivisible. We share this fragile earth with China and Russia, and we need to learn to live together peacefully and cooperatively. And I will put a link to this report in the chat. So in closing, I'm going to show you quickly some slides, and I also want to invite you to another meeting we're going to be having next Thursday at 7 o'clock. This will be an open discussion that will debrief the NATO summit and discuss this new NATO strategic concept. And we also have a book club coming up, and I will show you more information in the slides. So quickly, I will bring up my slides, and I will show you what this dismantling looks like. This is in Madrid over the weekend, 30,000 people on the streets. To the evening, they were on the streets. They were there every single day. In Brussels, at the headquarters of NATO, they were on their streets. No to war, no to NATO. In Canada, these are some pictures of our protests across the country. Here's Victoria. Here's Vancouver. We were on social media as well. Please follow us on Twitter and retweet our posts. This is in Calgary. This is in Regina, in Winnipeg. This is their fantastic graphics on social media. In Oakville, outside the defense minister's office, no to war, no to NATO. This is in Waterloo, cut military spending. And this is in Toronto, in front of the office of our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. And this is in Ottawa, in our capital, no to NATO, Canada out of NATO. In Hamilton, in Montreal. Again, on social media, this is a post from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And these are our banners and for NATO being a climate criminal. And this is why we need to abolish the alliance, because it harms the climate and the environment. And this is another example of our social media posts. And we have fact sheets in English and French. NATO is a threat to people in the planet. And I want to invite you to join our book club this summer. We're going to be reading Eve Engler's new important book entitled Standing on Guard for Whom? A People's History of the Canadian Military. There's a lot of really important information about NATO. It's important that you read this book and join and discuss it with us. And then finally, I want to just quickly mention that in many of our protests against NATO across the country, we included a call for the cancellation of RIMPAC, the big naval exercise that's taking place right now in the Asia Pacific. It's a naval exercise led by the United States, and it's happening at a time where the United Nations is having its ocean conference and saying that we have got a crisis in our oceans. So it is so important that we dismantle NATO and these other structures of militarism and domination. I look forward, friends, to continue to work with you. No to NATO, yes to peace. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tamara. Thank you to all of our speakers. So wonderful to have you all here. Thank you. That concludes an excellent, excellent panel. We're now in the Q&A portion of the evening. Lots of you have been posting your questions, which is awesome. Thanks again, Tamara, also for showing us those awesome slides. It's so, so heartening to see the ongoing resistance happening across the country to NATO. And in the chat, there are further actions that people can take against NATO as a danger to world peace. So thanks again for all those who posted their questions. We have about half an hour for the Q&A. And the first question that I'm going to take is from Gerard, who wants to know, this question is specifically for Tamara. I know that you have extensive knowledge about NATO funding, says Gerard. Could you please provide an update about the recent increased expenditures of NATO since Russia's special military operation in Ukraine and the consequent impact the reallocation of funds is having on other priorities?
So in 2014, at the NATO summit in Wales, the allies made a commitment to increase military spending by, to the 2% GDP target by 2024. And so combined NATO military spending went up from about $800 billion to now over $1.1 trillion. In the past 8 years, NATO military spending has increased by $350 billion. And in this latest summit, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the NATO 2% target is not a ceiling, but it's a floor. And so there is an expectation that all NATO members will not only reach the 2% GDP target, but will exceed it. Now, Canada's military spending right now is $33 billion. That's what we report to NATO. You can see NATO's defense expenditures report that it comes out about 4 times a year. I'll put a link to the chat, and you can see how Canada's military spending has increased from $20 billion in 2014 to now $33 billion last year. And our defense minister, Anita Anand, has just announced that in order to try to increase military spending to meet this 2% target, Canada will increase by another $8 billion immediately, and then try to meet the target over the next 5 years. So the Parliamentary Budget Office just released a report that said if Canada meets the 2% target, it will mean we are going to increase annual military spending to $51 billion. So another, $18 billion over the next 5 years or so. And this is remember, this is the crucial period that we need a massive investment in climate action to decarbonize. So we cannot be wasting any money in weapon systems, in soldiers, and in our military. So we need to send a clear and strong and public message to our politicians, to our government, to reduce military spending and reallocate it to our urgent social and environmental needs.
Thank you, Tamara. If there's anyone else that wants to comment on that, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, the next question is for Janine, but I think either of the Canadian panelists could answer it. Do you believe that with the current Canadian government, it is achievable for Canada to leave NATO? Can Canada leave NATO? What would happen if we did? Janine and then perhaps Tamara.
Sure, I think that's a great question, and that's one that we have had for years when we're out there, handing out information, trying to get petition signatures. It seems inconceivable for people to say, well, how can Canada not be part of NATO? Because of that misconception that NATO is defending our security and our safety. And I think, all of the speakers, what we've outlined is how NATO is really creating a danger for poor and working people, oppressed people all around the world. As for how Canada could leave NATO, I think that this also comes down to Canada being an imperialist country in its own right. I think Canada often gets mistaken as just a country doing the bidding of the United States. But I think there would need to be a major shift in the state of Canada. Canada is an imperialist country in its own right, and to be able to continue being, following their imperialist objectives, fighting for a piece of the pie and plundering oppressed nations and gaining control of foreign markets, they're strategically part of NATO so that they can have that piece of the pie. So I think we need to demand Canada out of NATO, but it doesn't start or end there. It also demands Canada to stop being an imperialist country.
Thank you, Janine. The next question, have any international bodies tried to hold NATO to account for its war crimes in various parts of the world, including Libya? I'll first pose the question to our Americans.
Yes, I would like to say to that question, the United States doesn't belong to the International Criminal Court. So, as hypocritical as they are, they're ready to tell Russia or anybody else that they commit war crimes, but they themselves are the biggest culprits, and they don't submit themselves to the International Criminal Court. They relegate that to smaller and weaker countries like African countries or other countries. So they don't subscribe to that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that the United States, I mean, NATO is an instrument of U.S. imperialism, and the United States views itself as international law. So really, these international bodies, they don't really stand a chance because the United States would ignore them anyway. And so the heavy influence that the United States has over these international bodies, and even with Russia and China's rise in their influence, a lot of that still occurs, a lot of that lack of accountability. And so, no, the United States isn't held to account, and I don't think we can expect it to unless there is some sort of huge change that occurs internationally. And I think that's where we come in terms of our struggle against imperialism, against the United States-led imperialism, and of course Canada's role in that.
Thank you, Danny. I'm going to go back to a question about Canada. Why is Canada so devoted to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Janine.
Sure, and I think that's kind of a continuation of the last question of Canada leaving NATO. I think it's important to look back because we're living right now in the period of time of Canada's 20-year plan that was established in 2008 to build up the Canada First Defense Strategy, as it's called. But going back a little bit further, back in 2005, the government of Canada, or the Liberal government actually at the time, released a white paper on defense calling for Canada to make its mark in the world diplomatically, economically, and militarily, and noting that Canada had to break through the glass ceiling of its middle power status and compete in the world of rising giants, which is all very clear what they're planning for their own, their role of Canada in the world. And there's also the Canada's international policy statement that was written in 2005. And I just want to quote from that. It says, "Make no mistake, we are in the midst of a major rebalancing of global power. New nations are rising as military and economic forces. Many established powers are striving to maintain their influence through regional integration and new alliances. In a world of traditional and emerging giants, independent countries like Canada countries with small populations risk being swept aside, their influence diminished, their ability to compete hampered. That may sound dramatic, but the stakes are that high. We will have to be smart, focused, agile, creative, and dogged in the pursuit of our interests. So that's from Canada's international policy statement in 2005, which was then followed by the Canada First Defence Strategy in 2008, which was a $490 billion plan to increase Canada's military over the next 20 years. Which we're still fighting against. And part of that today is the government of Canada's purchase of fighter jets, which many on this call are active in protesting. So I think all of that just shows how Canada realized, the government of Canada and the state of Canada, that they needed to be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization if they were going to accomplish these goals of breaking out of their middle power status and becoming a full-fledged imperialist country.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janine. The next question is from Hans, and it's for Danny. Danny, do you support the movement of Taiwanese youth demanding the multiplicity of political parties, also demanded during Tiananmen Square? And a follow-up question as well, how does China relate to NATO? So those two questions for Danny.
Well, in terms of the Taiwan question, I mean, I support whatever Taiwan is able to do. Well, first of all, I support the one China principle because that's just international law. I mean, that's just baked into international law. It's baked in the historic circumstances of China and of Taiwan itself. And so I support that. And I also support whatever is to occur free of US imperialism. And right now we have a situation in regards to Taiwan where the United States is deeply and heavily meddling on the island, as it has for decades upon decades, but it has escalated to the point where it is militarized. What is internationally recognized as part of China is militarized this island as a chip in its new Cold War, and it's extremely dangerous. And the United States's vocalization under Biden of being committed to military intervention should China supposedly invade Taiwan, I think is just so demonstrative of how much influence the United States is really leveling in regards to this question. So I support whatever, most of the island wants the status quo at some level, and I just support whatever is to occur when the United States is rightfully expelled from this question, because it has absolutely no right to determine what happens in relation to that question at all. And then in terms of NATO and China, I mean, the literal sense, if we just look at NATO's original mission, NATO's mission even since 1991, all of it is about Russia, and all of it is about, first it was about expanding and supposedly defending Europe from the Soviet Union, which was itself a ridiculous claim. And then now it's been all about containing Russia. So really, in the literal sense, China has nothing to do with NATO, but NATO, I think some other panelists said, NATO is not really a real thing. It's an alliance based upon US hegemony. It's the United States exerting its military influence over its junior partners. And really, it's just an expression of those interests. So because China is the foremost target of US imperialism, that's what's driving really most of what the United States does anywhere at this point. I mean, China is on the radar, no matter what question it is, no matter how far off we think it is, Latin America, Africa, all over the world. China is at the center of what the United States is trying to do militarily. So in a sense, NATO is really just a body and a really well-funded, well-oiled, well-armed body to try to achieve this great power competition. Trump called it. Now it's just the Indo-Pacific strategy and also this greater war effort toward Russia. I mean, it's all interconnected. And so I think that's what China has to do with NATO at this point. And that's why NATO is setting its sights on China, even though it's completely out of its jurisdiction. It's just really these NATO countries going along with its master, which is the United States.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. You had mentioned Latin America at some point, and there was a question from Tim who wants to know, in a recent webinar about Nicaragua, someone stated that the USA wants to do away with the United Nations altogether and substitute it with NATO. Do the panel think this is true? And then another question about Latin America is, can anyone talk about NATO's role in Latin America and how the increasingly progressive governments are responding to NATO? Tamara.
I definitely think that we should be concerned that NATO is subverting and undermining the United Nations. NATO uses this language, the rules-based international order. Well, whose rules? These are rules that are coming out of Washington. And this rules-based international order that NATO purports is a direct a challenge to the international law that has been carefully created through the United Nations system. And NATO is also, weakening the disarmament architecture, the political architecture, the peacekeeping architecture of the United Nations. So, we need to be very concerned about that, and we need that's just another reason why we have to work to dismantle NATO. And in terms of NATO and Latin America, the first partner for peace between NATO and Latin America was with the country of Colombia. And and think about that. Colombia under Iván Duque, was a narco state. With this terrible terrible record of killing human rights defenders, environmentalists, and journalists, and this is the country that NATO was partnering with in Latin America. And earlier this year, Iván Duque went to Brussels to talk about a stronger relationship between the alliance and Colombia. And I am really hoping with this new leftist government in Colombia that one of the first things that's done is ending this relationship between Colombia and NATO.
Thank you, Tamara. Next question I have is from B. Sandhu for Brother Djibo. What do you make of countries like Mali, et cetera, kicking out colonial powers France in this case and turning to other countries for security partnerships?
Mali contended that they discovered that France was training jihadist forces secretly in the country of Mali, and so that's one of the, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, as to really them becoming totally dissatisfied and disgusted, frankly, with France, because Mali, as one of the Francophone African countries, has a long history of dealing with French colonialism and French military, France-Afrique, and the CFA, which is the currency that France has connected the African currency connected to France. So when they discovered that France was training jihadists, they said, no, enough is enough, and we have to put you out. So that's my understanding of what happened.
The next question I have is for Tamara. Could you talk a little bit about Mexico not being a NATO member and the issue of holding NATO accountable more generally?
Well, I just want to remind everybody that a country that borders the United States, Mexico, is not a member of NATO, and Mexico has shown more independence in its foreign policy. An example is Mexico was at that really important nuclear disarmament meeting in Vienna last week, the first meeting on the parties on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Canada snubbed that meeting. We didn't send any diplomats to attend or observe that meeting. And Canada is not signing and ratifying the nuclear ban treaty, something that Mexico has done because of our membership in NATO. And the president of Mexico, Obrador, recently had a press conference where he denounced Washington's pursuit of Julian Assange and extraditing him to the United States. And during this press conference, Obrador showed the clip of the collateral murder video. This is incredible. I mean, Mexico has denounced the U.S. Drug war, U.S. gun violence, the guns from the United States that are flooding into Mexico and that are flooding from the United States into Canada. And so we see a country that borders the United States with a backbone, with independence and real sovereignty in its foreign policy, because it's not a member of NATO. And Canada can be like Mexico. It serves as an important example for us. And then the other thing that's important to know is that Serbian lawyers have come together on behalf of Serbians who have cancer, who have illnesses from their exposure to depleted uranium, from this illegal bombing by NATO in 1999. They are still pursuing, these Serbian lawyers are still pursuing a legal challenge against all of the NATO countries, including Canada, that were involved in that bombing. So that is taking place. And then the other thing is, in Afghanistan, where NATO forces, including Canada, committed terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity, the Afghan people have filed over 2 million complaints to the International Criminal Court for an investigation. And Canada is refusing to participate in that process and to turn over documents. So, we need to hold ourselves accountable for the war crimes that we committed in Afghanistan.
Thanks, Tamara, for that call for accountability. We're almost at the end of our time here, so I'm just going to take 2 more questions, and maybe we can just answer them quite briefly. Evelyn would like to know, how do you think we can get rid of NATO if we can't even get rid of nuclear weapons?
Well, I mean, to get rid of NATO, I think would require a pretty intense confrontation with the state, and it would have to be a confrontation in the countries where NATO is dominant. So it'd have to be the NATO countries where this occurs. And I think it starts with building a real peace movement, but it has to be a peace movement with principles, because we've been going on now, especially in the United States, for decades, where this peace movement has been rife with partisanship. It has been very confused. We've had the Democratic Party, we've had certain political forces really steer the anti-war movement into a dead end, in a hole, which it has yet to get out of. So I think first it's about rebuilding the peace movement, because if we can't, I think the spirit of the question is definitely well taken, where if we can't even demand for the complete removal and abolition of nuclear weapons, then how can we get to the abolition of something like NATO? And I think it will have to come through the confluence of NATO's instability. Tamara and others have talked about this. Like, NATO has its own problems. I mean, the NATO countries are all in some kind of crisis, economic, political, military, all of it. They're all going through this. And I think its expansion is actually a sign of desperation. But if we aren't organized to take advantage of that, because I think some of this is, we're not taking advantage of what is, I think, a very interesting moment in history, where NATO's expansion, its increasingly dominant role in the US's military strategy, in Europe's military strategy, it's all a sign that actually these countries are becoming weaker and weaker in a lot of ways, both economically fragile and also politically less influential than they were in the past. And I think China's rise, Russia's rise, as well as the fact that most countries around the world that have any experience with colonialism and imperialism do not really have an interest in just siding with the United States full force without being almost a de facto colony or occupied themselves. I think that we're seeing that play out. I talked about Japan in my talk. They're basically a de facto occupied by the United States, South Korea, all these countries in the Pacific alone. The only reason they're going in the U.S.'s direction at any level is because of that. But even that is very tenuous, very fragile. And I think that it is about us building a peace movement that can talk about this in a way that speaks to the power of imperialism. It speaks to the question of power itself, because I think that's where we've kind of gone astray in our part of the world.
Thank you so much, Danny. On a sort of similar-ish note, final question from an anonymous attendee. How does the panel overcome voices on the left who think NATO is a force for good, and whichever member state is a force for good in the world, given the recent NATO invasion, Russian invasion, in which some really do feel NATO is a necessary evil and decry our critical voices of NATO and its role in provoking Russia as quote unquote Putin apologists? Does anyone want to take that one?
I mean, I think we first of all can't be, we have to realize that everyone who's in the anti-war and peace movement who we can work with, we have to hold our allies in the peace and anti-war movement close. And maybe we don't have the same position on every issue. I hope that through events like this, through having educational events, through discussions, through not just, writing people who disagree with us off, but having these meaningful debates and discussions, we can come to a common ground, because we need to work together. And if we can't work together on that issue, that is too bad, but I think there is also so much that we can continue to agree on and continue to work on.
Thank you, Janine. I think that's a perfect note on which to end our panel today. Here's to building a real peace movement, as Danny called for. No to NATO, yes to peace. Thank you all so much for a lively discussion, for an important discussion, so critical at this point in history. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Djibo. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Janine. It's been very educational, and I know that I have learned a lot myself. So just a few short announcements. Again, our work at the CFPI is not possible without support from our community. So please do consider contributing to the work of CFPI at foreignpolicy.ca/donations, or become a monthly sustainer. Unlike the NATO Association of Canada, we do not receive any funding from the Canadian military, and are working relentlessly to help build a more just foreign policy. So thanks again to our incredible panelists, and a good evening to all of you. That's it for our program today. Thank you for your brilliant questions too, audience. Thank you. Good night and peace.